read a second time. I call the member for Denison.
Good morning, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, last Saturday morning in Hobart I attended the Doctors for Refugees rally. It was quite a successful event. It was early in the day and the weather wasn't very good, but there was probably some 300 people attended that rally. Obviously a lot of medical professionals. There were all sorts of doctors, a lot of GPs, nurses, midwives, allied health professionals, and also a number of other members of the community. It was a very passionate rally, and it was obviously put on so that people could express their concern about the bill that is before the parliament today. I heard all sorts of comments from the people at the rally, comments like excessive, silly, nonsensical, unnecessary, ridiculous. Clearly the people at that rally understand that this bill is unacceptable and shouldn't be supported, and I won't support it. And I can say with a great deal of confidence that those people at the rally in Hobart, and I understand there were similar rallies right around the country put on by Doctors for Refugees, they clearly are the tip of the iceberg, that there clearly are a great many people in the community that are appalled, not just at the bill before the parliament today, but at this country's treatment of asylum seekers over many, many years. One person came up to me and said, "You know, Andrew, sometime in the future they'll write a book or books about these days, and they will be astounded at how we could have been so cruel." Not unlike the way these days we talk about the stolen generation and other terrible injustices that have occurred in our nation's history. I can also say with some confidence, Deputy Speaker, that the people there at the rally on Saturday weren't just concerned with the bill before the parliament today. They were concerned with our response to asylum seekers generally. They understand very clearly that our response to asylum seekers is unethical. They understand very clearly that our response to asylum seekers is illegal. And they understand very clearly that our response to asylum seekers is impractical. Every way you look at it, the way this country, the way this government and other governments have responded to asylum seekers has been completely and utterly unacceptable. When I say unethical, I regret to say that although many people come into this place and they wring their hands and they try and look and act compassionate and they talk about stopping deaths at sea, they don't care about deaths at sea. They care about national security. They care about pandering to the xenophobia and the racism and the bigotry in our community. They care about trying to leverage off those fault lines in our community for their political self-interest. We are a rich and lucky country, Deputy Speaker. We're one of the most fortunate, one of the richest countries in the world. We have it within our capacity and within our heart to be compassionate when people come to our shores and claim to be fleeing for their life. We have it within our capacity and within our heart to give them protection, to hear their claims, and if their claims are accurate, to give them a permanent refuge in our fortunate country. Our response to asylum seekers is downright unethical.
Hear, hear.
And it's downright illegal.
Hear, hear.
Over many years, this parliament, previous governments have signed up to a number of international agreements. We signed up because people realised those agreements mattered and that it was the right thing to do to sign those agreements. We signed up to the Refugee Convention. We signed up to the Rome Statute. We signed up to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We signed up to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. But now we're happy just to tear them all up and walk away as though those international agreements don't matter. But yet, when it does serve our interests, we're the first country to criticise other countries for breaking international law and criticise other countries for not living up to their agreements. And I'll single out one of those, the Rome Statute. It is a crime to forcibly transfer people to a third country. It is a crime to forcibly detain someone indefinitely without trial. It is a crime to keep people in inhuman conditions. This country, this government, is guilty of crimes in international law. And it's impractical, Deputy Speaker. It's impractical what we do. You know, over the last 4 years, from 2012 to 2016, our offshore processing regime has cost $10.3 billion. $10.3 billion over the next 4 years, from 2016 to 2012. It'll cost another $5.7 billion. Enormous sums of money. And what about last Sunday, or was it Monday morning, when at about 2 o'clock in the morning, an asylum seeker who had been on Nauru for 12 months but who had come to Australia for surgery got out of bed, some say at 2 o'clock in the morning, flown by RAAF aircraft to Brisbane, from Melbourne to Brisbane, and then by RAAF aircraft to Nauru. What did that cost the taxpayer? What absurd theatre, designed to do nothing more than to punish some poor soul who did nothing more than make it to Australia and claim to be fleeing for his life. But no expenses to be spared to punish and to be cruel and to put in place a deterrent to other poor souls. That we'd get him up at 2 in the morning at Broadmeadows, put him on a RAF aircraft and fly him back to Nauru. Deputy Speaker, it's for these sorts of reasons that I feel that I must move an amendment today, and in fact I now formally, Deputy Speaker, move the amendment that has been circulated in my name. And it's very brief and it's self-explanatory, Deputy Speaker, so I'll read it. That all words after "that" be omitted with a view to substituting the following words. The House declines to give the bill a second reading and instead 1. Acknowledges that the global refugee crisis is for Australia a humanitarian challenge and not a border security problem. 2. Notes that Australia's response to asylum seekers will inevitably require a genuinely regional solution involving most, if not all, Southeast Asian countries, as well as Australia and New Zealand, and be approved by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. 3. Insists that Australia's response to asylum seekers be consistent with all of our international treaty obligations, including the Refugee Convention, the Rome Statute, the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And 4. Calls on the government to develop and implement a sophisticated policy response to this challenge that, as far as possible, deals with the situation in source countries, countries of first asylum and transit countries. Deputy Speaker, I don't know if the government and the opposition will support this amendment. I may be still enjoying the optimism of youth that I still feel in my heart that maybe there is still a chance that the government and the opposition will support this important amendment. But I suppose I shouldn't hold out much hope. Now, what I'm about to say is not a criticism of any one individual. There's a lot of good individuals in both the government and in the opposition. But collectively, the government is happy to play politics with the lives of people, play politics with asylum seekers, happy to pander to those xenophobes and bigots and racists in our community, happy to bring on something like this bill today, which I fully suspect, Deputy Speaker, has little to do with asylum seekers and a lot to do with trying to wedge the opposition. But to the opposition's credit, it hasn't fallen for it. So I don't hold out a lot of hope, I suppose, that the government will support this amendment. I hold out a little bit of hope that the Labor Party will support this amendment, given that they are opposing this bill today. But I'm not going to let the Labor Party get off scot-free. You know, I hear members of the Labor Party standing up here today and yesterday, and they're sort of wringing their hands and they're talking about the horrors of the way Australia treats asylum seekers, the horrors of this bill and how nonsensical it is. And they're making some quite good points about how silly is it that we would treat some people in this way, how cruel is it that we would treat some people in the way that this bill would require. But I'm not going to let the Labor Party off the hook, because in just about every respect, the Labor Party's position or policy on asylum seekers is identical to the Liberal Party, identical to the National Party. It was the Labor Party that created mandatory detention. It's the Labor Party that continues to support offshore processing. It's the Labor Party that approves of boat towbacks. So I'm not going to let either side off the hook here. You're both peas in a pod. You're both as bad as each other. You are both a black mark on this nation's history. And when in years to come they write books about this shameful period in Australian history, they won't let the Labor Party off the hook, because they will list the Liberal Party and the National Party and the Labor Party in the same list. Parties that regard this as a border security problem. Parties that regard this as a political challenge that if they don't handle really cleverly, it will backfire on them at the opinion polls. Well, I say to the Liberal Party and to the National Party and to the Labor Party, how about you start treating these poor souls who are fleeing for their life, how about you start treating them as human beings? How about you start treating this as a humanitarian challenge? It's not a border security problem for Australia. It's a humanitarian challenge for Australia. How about the Liberal Party, the National Party and the Labor Party start to see this for what it is and stop treating it as a border security problem? Start acting like real leaders. Start standing up in front of the community and stand for something and fight for it, and say that this country has an ethical obligation, this country has a legal obligation to stand for what's right. And when people come to our shores, whether it be by air or by boat, we give them protection, we hear their claim, and we give them permanent refuge in our lucky country for as long as they want to stay here. That would be the right thing to do. That would be the legal thing to do. It would be entirely consistent with the Refugee Convention. It would be entirely consistent with the Rome Statute. It would be entirely consistent with the Convention on the Rights of the Child, entirely consistent with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And then how about the Labor Party and the National Party and the Labor Party? Perhaps you could even put your heads together for once and stop being so confrontational and start acting in a collegiate way, and I'm sure the crossbench will be happy to work with you in a collegiate way, and to develop a sophisticated response to asylum seekers. Look at ways to settle the situation down in source countries. Look at the way to give real assistance to countries of first asylum, countries like Pakistan and Iran who currently get next to no aid from us, and how to work cooperatively with countries in our region, yes, to clamp down on the people smugglers, but also to develop a genuine regional solution. Nauru isn't a regional processing centre. Nauru is a gulag. It's a failed state, and it's a gulag no better than the hulks we used to put convicts on. How about we put our heads together and come up with a genuine regional solution that is approved by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, where people who come into our region are taken into care, are processed quickly and are given asylum in a number of countries, including this country. I make the point again, Deputy Speaker. We are one of the most fortunate and richest countries in the world. If anyone can do this right, it's us. But yet we are a pariah. We're not setting an example for the rest of the world. You know, the minister comes in here, the Prime Minister comes in here and talks about how in Europe they're envious of us. They're impressed by the way we deal with asylum seekers. What rot! No one can be proud of the fact that we have mandatory detention, that we have offshore processing, that we have boat towbacks, that we treat these people like criminals. We even call them illegals. They're not illegals. They're human beings, and they're irregular immigrants, and they're asylum seekers, which means they are trying to get to refuge. We should bring them in, give them protection, hear their claim, and give them permanent refuge in this country if their claims are fair income. If they're not fair income, send them back, but most of them are fair income. It's about time we started acting like an ethical country that has respect for the rule of law. It's about time the Liberal Party, the National Party and the Labor Party all stop worrying about your political self-interest and start acting like leaders. I tell you what, if you started acting like leaders, your political self-interest would probably improve, because all of a sudden people would stop holding you in contempt and they'd start respecting you. Crikey, you might even get people to vote for you. No wonder people are actually supporting people like the member for Melbourne, the member for Indi and the member for Mayo.
The member's time has expired. Is the amendment seconded?